Okay, people, this is March 22nd, 2017, with the trolls come marching in. It's picking up again, people, because I'm talking about serious stuff here, right? But it wouldn't matter if I was talking about walnuts or, planting carrots or the pond or Andre's Lego. It doesn't matter. You're going to come in anyway because, it's been going like that ever since Uncle John went into the hospital in January of 2015 and his extended family from Victoria crossed over and started whispering behind closed doors with corrupt social workers that wanted to get their little dirty fingers on Uncle John's pension plan and show this family who was the boss in terms of sign, pay for convalescent care, and since you don't want to sign for it, even though Mr. Duncan doesn't want to go in there, but we say he has to, because we got to prop up the healthcare system in order to keep our jobs. Otherwise, the government's going to fire us for not keeping that status quo going, because we need the income in order to pay ourselves our own pension plans when we retire. So we have to have a steady influx of users that pay for the service. That's what it is, people. It's a pay-as-you-go service. If nobody's paying, the system collapses. Those people won't have a job if nobody is paying to keep them employed. So anyway, I want to keep this short. I'm in Uncle John's chair. It's still his chair, right? I just want to say that when I filed these 2 notices of claims, this family paid for that. It wasn't under a waiver of fees, okay? It was paid in cash so that when it goes in front of a judge, it should be read as a complete unit per notice of claim, right? Now, the judge may read it, and because he's familiar or she's familiar with, the language, the judge may decide that the language doesn't suit the courthouse. Because I'm starting to think, people, that the courthouse, well, I'm not starting to think. I've been thinking like this for a long time. And just with the way the BC Liberal government gutted it in terms of closing down courthouses and shutting down legal aid offices and making it so that people can't get legal aid. And even if you could get legal aid, it's at a bare bone minimum where hundreds, thousands of people just don't qualify anymore since they've been elected into office since 2001. And I can tell you why, in part, and in part is because of what's coming. These old people coming in with their pension plans, with that system, with the workers taking advantage of that and seizing their assets, locking them up like dirty little secrets in these non-for-profit or for-profit or subsidized freaking care homes that is now being bought up by shady Chinese companies after they bought up all these properties in BC, kicked everybody out into the streets and locked the doors, and nobody lives in these properties, people. There's like thousands of houses in the Vancouver area that are completely empty, that are owned by Chinese people, right? Because it's a trend with them. Condominiums, completely empty. You've got condominium blocks, like apartment blocks, that if you were to take a heat sensor, that's how the provincial government of this province is trying to determine whether people live in these buildings, is by putting a heat sensor on it to see if anyone's moving around. Or they're checking on the hydro bills. But the hydro bills can be kind of like iffy because you can get those little gimmicks that can turn on the hydro and turn off the light and turn it on at certain hours of the day. So nobody really knows if somebody's living in there. So they're going to the extreme of actually putting a heat sensor onto the building to find out who's living in the building, if at all. Because these people are buying up the properties, kicking everybody out into the street, overinflating the property prices, and keeping these housing units empty. And now they're buying, these same kind of people from China, right, are now buying China, which has the worst human rights in terms of, they lock people up. to steal their organs while they're alive to sell it on the black market. This is what's buying up BC, right? And now they're investing, and it's been approved by the federal government, now they're investing into old folks' homes, mainly in BC, a $1 billion deal, shady company with a shady past, and we're supposed to believe that all these old people coming in for the next 20 years, as their houses are being foreclosed on in terms of you can't go home, you're confused, even though I can't speak English very well, I'm the professional, and your family can fuck off because we're taking over your assets by any means necessary so that we can have our friends from China come over and buy it and kick out the rest of your family while we lock you up over there and give you quality health care until we decide that we don't want you anymore, and then we're just going to shut off the IV and call it a natural death. Basically. That's what they did with Joan. They just shut off the IV, people, until she just shriveled up and died when they were done taking what they wanted from her. After all the paperwork was arranged and her body was ready to be shipped over, right? Those care workers got tired of wiping her ass, you know? As people were walking into her room and taking what they wanted, and she'd shoo them out. Like, those care homes aren't that great. They're like mini little prisons. You can't get in, you can't get out unless you punch in a code or you have a key. Right? You go there to die. Well, China's just bought up a whole bunch of those go-to-there-die places, as they're buying up all the properties and kicking everybody out. Right? Basically. So, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was, I paid to file those notices of claims to be read as is. Are they perfectly written? Obviously not. There was no one there to proofread it read to me. I already told you that. Right? I've never written one of those before. I did the best that I could. But if you read it, think about it, analyze it, see it for what it is, you would see that there is criminal activity going on within these systems that we're having to deal with right now. And that would be enough reason to carry on to take it to a trial so that we could work out those issues. Put your finger on it. Right? Put a check mark on it. Right? Is it going to get to that point? I don't know, people, because the court's probably being used as a system, as another system to filter out what they want to charge in terms of petty crimes. Here's an example. There was a fella, because there's been like 914 deaths in the year of 2016 from fentanyl overdoses. Nobody got charged for murder. It was an 80% increase in the number of deaths related to overdose from 2015. An 80% increase because of the fentanyl being used to wipe out, to kill off the street population. So that these rich immigrants that are coming in buying a property don't have to be socially responsible. Basically, that's what's happening. Right? So, you know, people crying, nobody's getting charged with murder, blah, 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 blah. So finally some dude got charged with murder because he was selling fentanyl in his drugs that apparently killed off some people. But at the end of the day, people, what about the ones bringing in the fentanyl? What about the ones that make the fentanyl and then give it to the petty dealer? Why is it that only the petty dealer is being charged and going to jail? Why not the ones that actually bring it in on the boat when they come over here to buy all the freaking properties? And kick out vulnerable families and steal old people's money. Now, am I saying that only Chinese do that? Well, obviously not. Not only Chinese people do that, right? But you know, they got a big foothold in that market, and now that they've bought all these old folks' homes, right? Because the provincial government wants to offload its responsibility onto the public, onto charities, onto private industry to take care of a problem that they're actually elected to represent in terms of an old population coming in, needing proper care. So the provincial government, BC Liberal government, is just putting these people at risk to be even more exploited as their families are being ripped apart like mine is being ripped apart because they don't want to take the time to look at notices of claim that were put in there that was paid by the plaintiff and look at it for what it is so that we can tackle this problem on a much larger scale, being that it's a large issue in terms of banks and health authorities and that type of thing. Right? So all I just want to say is, even if it gets thrown out of court, people, you know what? There are other family members in this household that can file notices of claim. Okay, I'm not the only one. And I've still got the provincial government if this stuff doesn't go through. So this little troll network that's connected to GMOI, the bank, the health authority, everyone that's trying to cover up their freaking asses, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because there's going to be another family member that's going to come in and file another notice of claim. And as for Andre, there is no statute of limitation when it comes to Andre. Okay? He's 6 now. Another 13, 14 years go by. He can still file a notice of claim. Now, John's sister, the loving nurse, may be dead by that time, buried in her Catholic dungeon, where I'm sure she'll feel very comfortable to be at, won't care. Right? 14 years from now, the woman is old. Chances are she's either going to be in a diaper being abused by some immigrant care worker, and the shit will come back to her and she'll be like, damn, now I know what Judy was talking about. Right? Or she'll be in her Catholic dungeon, happy as a pig in a blanket. Right? And Andre will still be wanting to get on with his life. Right? Talking about what his nana had to go through in order to get the truth out there so that this shit stops. Because it's going to stop, people, one way or another. It's going to be exposed. I'm telling you, I'm not going to let 20 years of vulnerable people go through the system when Uncle John put the freaking brakes on it. Okay? Maybe that's why Uncle John disappeared. Things happen for a reason. Right? Maybe it took him to disappear to really make people understand what is going on. I'm sorry. You don't go from $350,000 for a home up to $900,000 for the same home in a period of a year and a half. And then that home gets the people that live in it evicted so that home can sit completely empty as you've got hundreds, thousands of homeless people on the streets. And then you want to tell me that the people from China that are buying these homes are going to give good health care to the people that are going into these old folks' homes as their assets are being raped and pillaged by an immigrant workforce that is being exploited by a provincial government that doesn't give a shit about you and just likes to give kickbacks and payouts to shut people up so they can continue to rob the public? That's what I'm up against. So even if this stuff fails, in terms of I paid to have a judge read it, right? Make an assessment, right? So that the problem can be dealt with. Because the problem's not going to go away until somebody does that. And holds these people accountable for the crimes that they commit under the Criminal Code of Canada, but for some reason get a free pass because they're professional criminals. They're the ones that bring the fentanyl into the community. So therefore, they get immunity. But the ones dying out on the streets, you know, do they even get buried properly? You know, they're just forgotten souls that nobody seems to care about. Like Uncle John. You know, nobody can tell me that these people care about Uncle John. Because if they would have cared about Uncle John, they would have respected Uncle John's voice. Okay, so you remember this board. Christy Clark's AAA credit rating. Anyway, we're not going to worry too much about household politics U.S. because this stuff has been going on in the U.S. for a long time. It just took a little while to get caught up in Canada, right? But this is how it goes. Here's the Banksters, okay? This was written way back in the day. I just filled in some blanks just right now, okay? Overinflated, this is what the banks have been doing to the province of British Columbia, Canada, for the last couple of years by partnering up with overseas buyers, a lot of them from China, that brought in a lot of money laundering scams that the bank profited from, people, because they needed the banks in order to run the money through to overinflate the property houses so that they could make their $1 million off a $500,000 piece of property, kick everybody out, keep them homeless as they walk on by and try and convince themselves that somehow they are so important because they work and they're rich. So anyway, overinflated houses, house sales, okay? The higher the house sale, the more money the bank makes, which created hundreds of thousands, across the continent, but in British Columbia, thousands of houses empty after being bought. The houses were bought, overinflated prices, the buyer kicked them out, whoever didn't want to rent out the house, nothing. So now you have whole blocks in the Vancouver area with empty houses. And if you don't have whole blocks of empty houses, you have whole blocks of apartment buildings that are empty. 3, old people being forced to sell homes after being medically kidnapped by health authorities. Because it props up the healthcare system. The more you can get paying for those old folks' homes, the more you can keep those people employed in that old folks' home without going back and crying to the government that it's really a government responsibility and they should be paying for that. Versus putting it onto the private sector and the charity sector so that we can root out corruption. 5, homeless on rise as more drugs are being brought into the province to prop up the system so people don't fight back. If you drug them up, get them drinking, keep them confused, have their brains crashing with all this stress and all this other crap, nobody's going to show up at the courthouse anytime soon. Right? And then they come along and they bring the fentanyl after they get tired of spending all this money after they got them all fucked up and just start killing them off. Provide kickbacks to white-collar criminal activity to continue the money train. Because this is a money train, people. That's all it is. It's just a money train. Uncle John was just one domino in that money train. That's all he was to these people, right? Revenue Canada allows foreign companies to pillage Canada. Allows provincial governments to pillage constituents in province. Because what the Revenue Canada is doing now is they're giving permission for some company from China that has, it's suspicious company, right? They don't know too much about it, and considering what's been going on in here, it's just another means to, like, oh yeah, well, just to speed up the process. 20 years of people coming in with their houses, 20 years of people coming in with their pension plans, 20 years of families that are going to be destroyed. Okay? Because these people that do this kind of stuff don't care. BC Liberal government gave themselves an increase in wages and benefit packages, okay? They have been doing that a few times since they've been in government. Forced thousands into homelessness, okay? Because you have to remember, there's a lot of couch surfers out there now, right? Just because they're not on the street doesn't mean that they're not facing homelessness. Okay, as houses sit empty and people can't afford to rent, even if they find a place. Even if you find a place, you can't afford to rent it anymore because of the shit that went on in here. Offloading healthcare to private offshore companies with immigrant workforce and poor human right record. China has one of the worst human right records, and this is what the BC Liberal government is handing over in terms of you manage this, what's coming. You manage what's coming. Right? That was just a little quick synopsis. And one last thing before I upload this. Being that we're dealing with all these immigrants from all these different companies, or countries I should say, whether they're the exploited immigrant workforce that does the grunt work for the provincial government because the provincial government doesn't want to pay its own people to do the same job with fair union wages and whatnot, or whether it's the corrupt immigrant company coming in to buy up all the old folks' homes because it's salivating at the mouth, because it's counting the money before it even comes in, because the projections tell you for the next 20 years we're talking about billions of dollars and billions of dollars of house sales, right, that will sit empty until the majority of the Canadian-born people are dead and gone, whether through drugs, whether through stress, whether through going to jail, right? Doesn't matter where you go, people. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter where you go. You're going to find a large immigrant population of some kind. They all don't come from one country. They come from different countries, and obviously different areas have concentrations of, demographics of, ethnic groups. Like in Richmond, for example, you're going to find more people in Richmond that come from China. In Surrey, you're going to find more people that come from India. That type of thing, right? But what I'm trying to say is, go into the banking institution, go into the healthcare system, right? You go into these institutions, people, and what you're going to see is a majority immigrant workforce that many of them can't speak proper English, right? Many of them can't write it properly. Even when they're in a position where they're of high status, can't speak it properly. And if they can't speak it properly, they can't write it properly. But yet they're making the decision for you as an old person where you're going to be and who's going to be in your life, regardless of what your life past experiences were. Because all of a sudden, as soon as you fall into their trap, because you end up at a public hospital and somebody in that public hospital decides they want your money and they're going to get it by any means necessary, they're going to call in their little colluded friends, their colluded group of professional workers that come from all these different countries, and they're going to get it. They're going to get it, people, because they got Uncle John's, and every now and then they're going to throw a bone, right, to the corrupt families that prop up that system, because like John's sister, she got her bone. She got to spend John's money, because by spending John's money and getting her bone, now she has to make sure that the system continues to get its bone. Only it's not one bone, people. We're talking 20 years of bones. Okay? Well, the provincial government, the governing one, is banking, building up their portfolios with their pension plans and their superannuation, as they're taking from the people to pay for that portfolio to go up and up and up. Nobody wants to talk about it. But yeah, no, you go into the banking system. If I was to go to my local bank, here's the point of this last thing. Out of we'll just say 20 workers, out of 20 workers, people, you might find at best maybe 5. More likely 3 or 4 workers who are of Caucasian descent. The rest of them are immigrant workers from somewhere. Or they were born here after their parents came here from a different country. It's almost like the white people now, when you go to the healthcare system or when you go into a banking system or wherever you go, are the minority where the company hires that person just so that they can project that they're not racist or operating under racist or genocidal intentions. Because this is genocidal as to what's going on. This is a genocidal attack based on racism. I'm sorry, you don't go downtown, have all these empty homes, condos or houses or whatever, with thousands of homeless people on the streets. Nobody can afford to buy anything anymore. Nobody can afford to rent anything anymore. As these rich immigrants are walking down the street when they're brave enough to come to Canada and flaunt their wealth, and then tell me they're not racist. These are the ones that are working in our banks. These are the ones that are working in our hospitals. These are the ones that are working in our temporary, well, they're not temporary. Drop the word temporary. These things that they like to call temporary care wards, they're not. They're the introduction to lockdown in terms of you're going to a care home, aka prison. After we find a way to take your assets, you're going to prison. That's where you're going. And since the provincial government doesn't want to deal with that problem, it just sells it off to somebody else that's actually part of the problem. And this company, being that it's so, there's whatever, nobody really knows much about it, it doesn't give a shit. It doesn't give a shit any more than what it gives a shit with what's going on with the people out here now. Because this is genocide, people. This is what's happening. The Canadian people that were born here that have assets are being preyed upon while your provincial government isn't protecting you. And I think that's the message for Uncle John. Because even the ones that were born here and work in that system, they're not thinking about where they're going to be in 40 years from now or in 15 years from now, other than they got a nice big fat pension plan like John's sister, with a few extra $100,000 in there because she was successful at robbing his money without being caught because the bank wanted the fucking money too. And the healthcare system wanted the fucking money too. And the government don't give a shit as long as they get their money.